Hello, this is Katerina Nestorenko in the studio with you. Today, here's what we're going to talk about. A brilliant special operation. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are killing Russians from Pokrovsk. For the first time in history, Ukrainians shot down a Russian helicopter with a drone in the Rostov region. A drone attack on the Netherlands. Air defense forces opened fire on Russian drones. Putin is terminally ill and for the first time spoke about his health himself. Moscow is without power. A powerful drone attack on Russia's main hydroelectric power station. A massive attack on Russia. An attack on airfields in Crimea. Dozens of enemy aircraft will never take off again. The game is over. Russian soldiers' families have stopped receiving death benefits. Revolution in the USA. Americans are protesting against Trump's peace plan, which resembles a capitulation plan. A student from India came to Russia to study and ended up at war. The Kremlin has started hunting its own Z-bloggers. All this and more in just a few seconds. But right now, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't get lost on YouTube. Well then, let's get started. It's hell on the front lines. As President Zelensky himself notes, more than 150,000 Russians are now storming the Pokrovsk direction. This is the most difficult direction. Our forces keep fighting back, and the weather is helping us with that. This was reported by Andriy Ochinash, commander of the UAV crew from the Heavenly Brigade Rubezh in Kazan.
Yes. The weather affects us in a rather peculiar way, I would say, because due to the fog, we can't see the enemy's movements or relocations. This is quite a significant complication for Ukraine's defense forces, because the enemy can carry out assaults using vehicles. But again, there is also an advantage for us, in that the rains prevent the enemy's vehicles from moving as efficiently as they would like. There have already been several assaults where the enemy got stuck in the swamps and mud and literally sank. There was even an instance where, in just about 10 minutes of assault operations, the enemy managed to lose around 5 vehicles along with their troops, sinking them.
As the Bakhmut demon emphasized, Pokrovsk has not been lost, even though the media are already claiming otherwise.
We are holding Pokrovsk.
Moreover, according to the air assault forces, the AFU have cleared the center of Pokrovsk, and the enemy has not been able to gain a foothold there. The southwest direction towards Kostiantynivka is also ablaze. The Russians continue their assaults, but unsuccessfully. The 93rd Mechanized Brigade Kolodny Yar showed one of the assaults that ended in favor of the AFU. The enemy also launched an offensive between the Vovchansk and Kupiansk directions. However, Ukrainian drones are tearing apart Russian assault groups. Here is one of them, which tried to enter the village of Bohuslavka in the Kharkiv region. The Russians are even complaining that all the loaves of the AFU have been destroyed in the Vovchansk direction.
We are fighters from one of the Vovchansk directions, the 128th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, to drive across challenging roads, to transport our team members and essential supplies, to bring in urgently needed medicine and important medical equipment, to deliver critical tools and resources, and to evacuate our wounded and fallen brothers safely from dangerous areas. We need a dependable vehicle like a UAZ or a similar rugged all-terrain vehicle. Such a vehicle is vital for our missions, ensuring we can respond quickly, support our operations, and protect everyone involved. A loaf. Since the enemy burned our last loaf, we can't do this anymore. If you can somehow help us get a vehicle, we would be very grateful to you. Victory will be ours.
The Lyceum fighters have also intensified their offensive in the Zaporizhzhia region. For the first time in 3 years, there are heavy battles in the Huliaipol direction. In the past 24 hours alone, there have been 157 combat clashes along the entire front line. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine, and if you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. All the attention of Ukrainians is now focused on that same US peace plan. As a journalist from The Guardian writes, the US has informed its NATO allies that they will put pressure on Zelensky so that he signs a peace agreement between the US and the Russian Federation within just a few days. Because otherwise, Ukraine will supposedly face an even worse plan later. As Trump himself says, this is not the last offer to Ukraine.
Is this your final offer to Ukraine? No, it's not the last one. I would like to achieve peace. This should have happened. This should have happened a long time ago. The war between Ukraine and Russia should never have happened. If I had been president, this would never have happened. We are trying to stop it. One way or another, we have to stop it. We are working on it.
But what if Zelensky refuses?
well, then he can continue. Then he can fight as long as he wants.
Interestingly, Americans do not support Trump's decisions. People have taken to fraud. There is a mass protest with shouts of, "Trump, you just sold out Ukraine." According to Bild, Europeans also disagree with many points in this plan. They want to amend at least 4 points. Territorial issues are known. Europe also does not approve of the idea of handing over strategically important territories such as Donbas and Crimea to Russia. They also disagree with the reduction of the Ukrainian army. There is also disagreement over security guarantees for Ukraine, especially those that Russia is allegedly ready to provide, as well as over the issue of frozen assets. Putin should not get them back and profit from it. Europeans understand the full danger and realize that they could be Russia's next target. Moreover, as it became known, yesterday in the Netherlands, shots were fired at a drone flying over an airbase. According to the country's Ministry of Defense, they were shot down, and everyone clearly understands whose drones they were. But of course, not everyone in Europe supports Ukraine, because there are people like Orban and Fico. Orban is calling on the EU to unconditionally and immediately agree to all points of the peace plan. He emphasizes that they must, without delay, begin autonomous and direct negotiations with Russia. As for helping Ukraine, he certainly will not provide any assistance and refuses to do so. Fico, on the other hand, called the plan grandiose and stated that Russia would emerge victorious.
In this agreement, Ukraine's position is 100 times worse than it was in April 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you, or once again emphasize, that we support such a proposal. As a small Slovakia, I will do my utmost to support this peace agreement. But all this concerns the peace agreement. This is a grandiose matter. Simply grandiose. If this plan is signed, Russia will emerge from this war as a complete victor. Russia will come out of this war greatly strengthened both morally and economically.
Representatives of Ukraine, the US, the UK, France and Germany met in Switzerland for consultations regarding the peace plan. The Ukrainian delegation arrived first. And as Zelensky said, our representatives know how to defend Ukrainian interests.
Right now, the discussion is about certain points of one document or another. It is necessary to ensure that nowhere in Europe or the world does the principle prevail that crimes against people and humanity, against states and nations, can be rewarded or forgiven in any way. A real world is always based on guaranteed security and justice. And this feeling is not just mine. I know that this is the feeling of millions of our people and the majority of people in the world.
As Secretary of State Shamar Kruby stated, the American plan to end the war was formed precisely on the basis of Russian proposals, but taking into account Ukraine's position. But it is known that Ukraine's positions were not strongly considered there, which is exactly why consultations must take place. As Boris Johnson stated, this peace plan is a complete betrayal of Ukraine and makes Ukraine vulnerable to a third invasion. And what do you think about this plan? What do you think we will get as a result? Write your opinion in the comments. It will be interesting to read, because as far as I can see, opinions in our society are divided. Reading the comments on the previous episodes, I see that many of our viewers are from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such reasonable viewers. Let us know in the comments under this episode as well which country you're watching us from and whether people there support us. Our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments, and in the meantime, we continue. Next up is the most interesting part. For the first time, and hopefully not the last, special operation forces have destroyed a Russian helicopter, such as the Mi-8, in the air using a long-range FP-1 drone. The strike was carried out over the village of Kutenikovo in the Rostov region of the Russian Federation. The distance from the front line is about 190 kilometers. As the Special Operations Forces note, the mission required a high level of technical training and creative planning. And as we can see, they managed it. It was also a successful night for our defenders, who knocked out the power in Crimea. There, the strikes on the oil depot are visible to the naked eye. Star Wars turned out to be unsuccessful for the Russians.
Already at azimuth 200, the charge is flying. Subtitles by Dima Tozok. We're working hard, we're working together, and we're helping as much as we possibly can. Please, cease fire. We ask you to stop firing. Cease fire now. We're here to help. We're working, and we need you to cease fire immediately.
Later it became known that not only the oil depots were hit, but also the Saki airfield. There were also strikes on the energy sector in the temporarily occupied part of Donetsk region. But there were also fires near Moscow. Transformers are burning there. Shatora State District power plant in the Moscow region. At the time of the Ministry of Emergency Situations arrival, 3 transformers, each 65 square meters, were burning. The Moscow region is without power. Moreover, the power plant was hit again in the morning. As we can see, air defense in Russia still isn't really saving them. Like this video, if, like me, you want these kinds of attacks to become a daily occurrence. Putin himself started talking about his health. Of course, not without reason. After all, his sickly appearance and many outward signs give his enemies hope for the dictator's imminent end. And here are the details in our report.
The Russian dictator has given himself away. Putin openly says he wants to live longer, and even 150 years is no longer enough for him.
We are even setting specific goals for ourselves to increase average life expectancy, and we're doing everything right. Maybe in theory we could reach 150 years. But first of all, it will always feel like it's not enough.
This statement from Putin was made at the conference Journey into the World of Artificial Intelligence. Notably, discussions about immortality have become a normal topic for debate in Russian society. At the conference, the first to bring up this topic was the head of Sberbank, Herman Gref, undoubtedly in order to curry favor with the dictator.
What is your opinion on the predictions published by Mr. Kurzweil, one of the most well-known technological futurists, who says that everyone who lives through the next 6 to 7 years will have a chance not only to live to 100 and beyond, but to achieve immortality? His latest prediction is that this will happen at the turn of the decade. Between 2030 and 2035, around the year 2032.
Gref asked this question to the Chinese science fiction writer Chen Qiufan, who was present on the panel. Qiufan didn't give a direct answer, but Bonkerny immediately picked up the topic.
There was a time when people lived 20, 30, 35 years, and that was considered normal. Then the average age. In certain countries and on other planets in general, it started to increase. 35, 45, 50 years. That was also considered normal. Now, in some countries, it's already 80, and we are striving for the same, so that our average age is a bit higher for women, a bit lower for men.
Especially for Putin, it will be too little. He doesn't hide that. And even a lifespan of 150 years has already been mentioned. It was exactly this age that the Russian dictator discussed with his Chinese counterpart at the beginning of September during the broadcast of the military parade. Their conversation was recorded completely by accident at that time.
Human organs can be transplanted continuously. The longer you live, the younger you become, and you can even achieve immortality. Some predict that in this century, people may live to be 150 years old.
But Putin talked not only about immortality at this conference, but also about his own health. He let it slip as if by accident that everything is absolutely fine with him.
I just underwent my annual checkup just a short while ago. It took almost 2 days. With an overnight stay at the clinic, I went there in the afternoon and left the next day. Thank God everything is fine. Getting through such a procedure in a minute seems like science fiction.
When your health is really good, a full body checkup hardly takes 2 days. But this wasn't said for no reason. Putin is trying to convince everyone that he's in good health, when in reality everything is falling apart. And isn't it a remarkable coincidence that he started talking about his health just 10 days after the internet began discussing the extremely unhealthy appearance of the Russian dictator's hands?
Even with all those varicose veins on his hands, the main thing is something else. When was the last time you saw Putin in a gym? We saw him a year ago when he entered the gym. Putin was in a suit, he didn't sit down. He didn't get on the exercise machines or try to show us anything. In other words, that's it. Putin is finished. Putin with a bare torso, Putin on skates, Putin on skis, that's all over. His days of active sports are over. It's clear that Putin is already an old man who can't show off, can't display his body to us, because it's been a long time since it was athletic.
What Putin's health is really like, of course, is unknown. But journalists have repeatedly written about the bunker grandpa being treated for cancer and about how he is regularly visited by an oncologist surgeon. But let's suppose that the Russian Tsar's health is actually not that bad. That doesn't change the fact that Putin wants to live a very long life. Russian geneticists are working day and night to find a solution, and it's all official. In 2019, Russia adopted a federal scientific and technical program for the development of genetic technologies. Billions of rubles are being spent on these projects.
Endocrinologist Maria Vorontsova is involved. Yes, Vladimir Putin's eldest daughter. It is to her that the dictator has entrusted the important mission of extending his life for decades. For example, one of the large-scale projects is called 100,000 plus me. The project is funded by Rosneft, which is now headed by another of Putin's associates, Igor Sechin. Back in the 90s, they used to carry Vladimir Vladimirovich's suitcases. As part of the project, scientists will decode the genome of 100,000 Russians. These genome sequences will help identify genetic defects typical for the Russian ethnic group. And further, this information will help improve the health of dear Russians.
All of this is presented under the guise of caring for Russians. In reality, Putin only thinks about himself. And the Russian dictator is also afraid. He fears death and everyone around him because it is precisely those closest to him who could kill him. And such paranoia could play a cruel joke on the dictator, one that the world and Ukrainians first and foremost will truly appreciate.
He doesn't trust anyone. And so, I'm convinced that at night he locks some armored door with 25 bolts and doesn't let anyone in. And that's where the hope lies. That is, there's hope that what happened to Stalin will happen to him as well. So, roughly speaking, if he has, say, a heart attack, he could be saved if a doctor was called in time, but he's so afraid that he might not be able to reach the button that opens the door from the inside, and from the outside, no one will be able to get to him because the door is locked in such a way that it can't be broken down.
There won't be any more Grabavois. Due to budget problems, the government of Caucasia has cancelled the regional payments to the families of soldiers killed in the war in Ukraine, which previously amounted to 1.1 million rubles. And in fact, the cancellation of these death benefits is already becoming a trend. You'll find out the details now.
In Caucasia, regional payments to the families of deceased Russian servicemen known as death benefits have been cancelled. The very same payments that many relatives of the deceased are cynically eager to get their hands on.
He goes off to the special military operation and that's it. I register the kids under his name. We're like this happy couple. I get a one-time payment of 5 million. Kindergarten, benefits, school benefits, monthly payment. The wife is a service member and then, well, he gets killed over there.
In fact, this money, which amounts to more than 1 million rubles, used to help relatives organize the funeral before federal assistance arrived.
I won't read out everything they wrote to me because there are hardly any words that aren't obscene and I understand their emotions. I'll just quote the last sentence. It's not obscene and it sums up the whole point. Please pass this on to them over there. That the officials' response about the budget being tight, that they have no money and to be patient, does not satisfy us.
Now, however, regional government support is disappearing.
The 1 million rubles from the regional treasury, which was supposed to be paid to the family of a fallen soldier, is apparently no longer being issued in the Republic.
The authorities explain this decision by citing a budget deficit. Spending on these payments has been cut almost in half, from 600 million to 287 million.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
But for families who have lost their soldiers in the war, this is not just an abstract number representing the lack of any timely support. And
what does this mean? God willing, no one will ever have to face this, and maybe not everyone knows about it, but when one of our soldiers dies at the front, all the payments from SOGAS, from the Ministry of Defense, get delayed. They usually come in about 6 months because the procedure is complicated, there are a lot of documents, and it takes time for everything to go through, and before this payment is cancelled, when it finally arrives, cargo 200, the family members receive 100,000 from the region, plus a million 100,000. This amount of money was enough to arrange a proper funeral for their father, brother, or husband.
Khakassia became the second Russian region to cancel funeral payments after the Trans-Baikal territory. Public activists note that when there are delays in federal payments, families are left alone to deal with all the funeral expenses.
Today, the maximum they receive is about 100,000, and that's only if they come on time. They have nothing to bury their loved ones with. It's a disgrace when our soldier comes back in a zinc coffin and the family doesn't know where to get the money. That's why I'm asking for the payment to be reinstated as well.
The presidential one-time payment and insurance compensations are still in effect under the state program, but in practice the money arrives late, and bureaucracy makes the process long and complicated. Previously, funeral allowances covered these gaps. Now all organizational expenses fall on the family's shoulders. If federal programs are unable to cover them in full, relatives find themselves in a situation where the death of so-called military personnel is accompanied by financial uncertainty. But in fact, payments in Russia have their own story.
A mother from my hometown, whose son was unfortunately and tragically killed, has been unable to receive the money for 6 months. The money was simply stolen by the Ministry of Defense, by representatives of the Ministry of Defense. And she still can't get it. For half a year now, the case has been in court. Of course, you know what our commercial Russian courts are like. There's a 90% chance the woman won't win.
The decision to cancel funeral payments shows that the state is willing to save money on those who suffer from the consequences of a war it is already involved in.
My friend, after being wounded, came home on leave. By the end of his leave, I had already come back from the hospital, also on leave. I asked him, I said, "So, Roma, did you get the money for your injury?" He said, "No, I didn't get it." I asked, "How did that happen? How did it go?" He was given a 60-day leave of absence. Unfortunately, he wasn't paid. When he came back to his regiment to sort things out, upon his return, he was tragically killed, but they declared him missing in action.
Public organizations and activists are already expressing concern. They say that these payments are not just money for funerals, but a form of minimal social support that the state systematically ignores. The cancellation of funeral payments is yet another example of how the aggressor turns other people's suffering into statistics.
It's already well known that Russians are deceitfully dragging all foreigners to the front lines. An Indian student was no exception. 22-year-old Azad came to Russia to study, but instead of university, he ended up being mobilized. And now he is begging to be sent home.
I signed a contract to serve in the Russian-Ukrainian war, which is my biggest mistake. Because of this, I am now in Ukraine as a war criminal. And now I am in a completely hopeless situation. I don't know what will happen next, but there is a message I want to send to the citizens of India, to any student coming to Russia for education or work. Be careful, because there are a lot of scammers here. A lot of them.
According to him, he was forced to sign the contract under threat of 7 years in prison. And he was sent to the front without any training, together with other foreigners. Now his family is asking the Indian authorities to save him. The Kremlin has started a hunt for its own pocket bloggers. Nonsense. How is this possible? But that's how it is, because even their own people can no longer stay silent about the dire state of Putin's army. And the Kremlin absolutely cannot tolerate this.
Punish your own so that outsiders are afraid. Russian propagandists have learned this rule well, which is why they systematically drove all dissenting Russians out of the information space. But today the situation has reached the point where the infighting in the Z community has already started among their own.
No one, regardless of their status, protection, or connections, nothing will help you. So guys, while it's not too late, come to an agreement.
Even the West is now writing about how Putin's regime has started hunting its own Z-bloggers. Even in the West, they're writing about it now. That's exactly the headline The Economist published. However, the internal details turned out to be much deeper. In short, the conflict broke out between those who report on the situation at the front as it really is, and their opponents, the victory-obsessed supporters, whose publications always claim everything is going well at the front and Russia is advancing everywhere.
We gave everyone a chance to come to their senses, those who, as they say, still have brains, to remove all the filth from their channels and apologize for what they've already written. As for those who don't do this, we said that, of course, we will destroy them in the legal field through criminal prosecution, so that each of them gets what they deserve, because this can't go on any longer.
Chechen General Alaudinov has unofficially become the leader of everyone who, at least occasionally, tells the truth about the war. They praise Akhmat, attract new volunteers, and raise money for the units. However, because of their criticism, they have become undesirable to the regime. The most prominent among them was Igor Strelkov-Girkin. What happened to him is well known to everyone. He is behind bars. Among the recent victims are Roman Lekin and Tatiana Montyan, Oksana Kobeleva. They were targeted by the head of the pro-government Z group, Vladimir Solovyov, and by smaller channel authors within his network, Friends.
Please forgive me, but I must admit that I am in a bit of a state of anger right now, at this very moment.
But all the active efforts to force people to tell only victorious stories online fell apart as soon as Solovyov and his company decided to go after Alaudinov himself.
He immediately disavowed them, but the situation didn't end there. Alaudinov announced that the entire network faces either prison or repentance, and part of the network went to beg for forgiveness. One of the first was Ilya Remeslo, a well-known loyalist in certain circles who supports every attack by Solovyov on war correspondence and urgent fundraisers. He came to Alaudinov to beg for forgiveness.
Stop doing this immediately, because I have absolutely reliable information that certain actions have already been taken against you, and no one, regardless of their status, protection, or connections, will be able to help you.
You have to admit, this really looks like the classic internet apologies you see when someone in Russia crosses the Kadyrovites. At the same time, Solovyov himself decided not to push things too far. The very next day, he showered the Chechen commander with compliments.
Apti Aronovich Lodinov, Lieutenant General, hero of Russia, hero of Chechnya, hero of the DPR and LPR. If he isn't, then he should be. A brilliant Russian general, an outstanding religious thinker, a person of phenomenal personal integrity, and my close friend.
And it seems that at this stage, this helped the king of Z propaganda stay on his throne, at least for now. The main message in Alaudinov's next video was not retribution, but reconciliation between the sides. However, there was a hint that if the attacks from Solovyov's followers don't stop, they will definitely regret it.
They will either end up in prison or they won't be living in Russia. That's all there is to it. And those who want to be on the team that will lead our country to our shared victory need to unite already. And enough of all these quarrels, talk, and idle chatter.
Almost the only pro-government propagandist who wasn't afraid of threats from the head of Akhmat was Anastasia Mironova.
She published yet another post. The Chechen commander who is lecturing us on how to live is still officially a suspect in a fraud attempt case. The case is described online. It's a case like that of former prosecutor Fedorov offering $1 million to settle an issue with law enforcement. The case is not closed, but
most likely, Nastya's days of freedom are numbered since she has lost Solovyov's support. And everyone knows very well how Kadyrov's people know how to resolve issues. At the same time, analysts are drawing attention to another feature. Those absurd laws that were long supported by the Z community are now starting to work against them. This means the regime has made it clear that everyone without exception can be brought to heel.
Kobolev was fined. Well, the punishment, of course, isn't as severe as it is for opponents of the war, who rarely get off with just a fine, but for the Z community, this was an important and in many ways precedent-setting case. The laws that were previously used to persecute anti-war activists, politicians and journalists have now turned against the Z supporters themselves, and not just the prominent ones, but quite ordinary members as well. In other words, this could become quite a widespread phenomenon.
Personally, I'd like to add, let it become widespread. In recent days, the entire Z community has been practically jumping out of their skin, arguing over who loves Russia more. Which means there's less time left for brainwashing. And not everyone will survive this struggle, which is also something to be glad about.
Russians have started preparing for the shock of inflation due to tax increases. Russian consumers are preparing for a new wave of accelerated price growth due to tax increases, which will begin in 2026. What will the financial year 2026 be like for ordinary, hard-working Russians? That's what we'll talk about next.
The further it goes, the worse it gets. Putin's fairy tales about a wonderful life in Russia have failed.
To be honest, I seriously doubt I can add anything new here.
The dictator's fabricated stories that the country is developing despite unprecedented sanctions and pressure from the Western world,
And that overall the situation is stable and reliable.
do not stand up to the facts. Putin is on the brink of economic catastrophe.
Everything is steadily falling apart. The phrase everything is steadily falling apart is exactly what characterizes the Russian economy. When people say everything is fine, but at the same time the decline is more than obvious.
The Russian authorities are preparing the population for a sharp decline in living standards due to a record budget deficit, which in 2025 will reach almost 6 trillion rubles.
The 5.7 trillion budget deficit that the Russian Ministry of Finance is talking about is their planned estimate. But when it comes to calculations from more independent sources, let's call them that, take for example the former first deputy head of the Russian Central Bank, Yugin. Yugin said the budget deficit will be 8 trillion. That's definitely not 5.7 anymore.
To cover the financial gap, the Kremlin plans to raise taxes.
This includes taxes and fees, and Russia is going through with it. Starting January 1st, the value-added tax will be increased to 22%. But a recycling fee will also be introduced, and the environmental fee will be increased, or rather raised. The recycling fee, the environmental fee will be increased, and new fees will also be introduced.
The government also plans to freeze money in bank accounts and cut social spending. Maternity capital will only be paid for the third child, and family mortgage programs will be shifted onto the regions.
This is what the propaganda is talking about. Mardan is one of the leading Russian propagandists, as well as other Russians. As the Orthodox oligarch Malafeev calls it, this means the state should not pay pensions, in other words, the abolition of pensions. Another consequence is that the state will allocate less money for salaries in the public sector, which means there could also be cuts here. Next, what could happen is the printing of money.
Economists note that Russia is facing a typical wartime crisis: rising military spending, a budget deficit, and increasing prices for fuel and food. Annual inflation in Russia has exceeded 8%, and gasoline prices have risen by more than 10%.
There will be an acceleration of inflation. Precisely because this money will be injected and because taxes will be raised, this will further fuel inflation. At the same time, inflation in Russia is already far from low. Officially, of course, it's 8%. But people who follow this issue say that inflation in Russia for food products and everyday goods is around 28 to 32%.
Secondly, over the past 7 years, the planned increase in VAT in 2026 will put Russia among the top 20 countries in the world in terms of this tax rate. Only some European countries have a higher VAT, and outside the European region, Russia will be sharing the lead with Uruguay.
And in Russia, yes, they are going ahead with raising this VAT. It will undoubtedly hit the entire economy hard, affecting the whole supply chain. And when it comes to the supply chain, meaning when a product is sold several times, each time you'll have to pay 2% more. So it might seem like a small thing, but it will have a very, very unpleasant impact. In terms of population, accordingly, that's when Russia stands out as a leader among countries in this tax, but this means that in Russia, it's not profitable to create added value, which essentially means it's profitable to do nothing at all.
Simply put, the Kremlin dictator, having started a war against Ukraine, is with his own hands destroying his own empire, which sooner or later will inevitably fall.
And to end on a slightly positive note, a new TV show called MILF Manor is being actively discussed online. There, moms aged 40 and over are looking for a boyfriend among each other's sons. Viewers are promised 12 episodes. If you've seen at least one, write in the comments what you think of it. Do you like the idea, or is it so-so? That's all for now. Give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our next episodes. See you next time.